Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Drake, and today we have JR Goldman from our SE org here at Vectra, and we are going to talk about best practices when it comes to implementing or using a XDR. So thank you, JR, for joining us today.
Hey, Nicole, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Perfect. So we'll jump right in. So first, we just want to explain what is an XDR or an extended detection and response platform or solution.
So what's really funny about the definition XDR is it's actually pretty hard to define. And if you look around the industry, many different vendors who sort of claim to be in this space all have varying definitions of what XDR actually means or means to them or how they market it. Fundamentally, though, the way that I think about it is usually EDR plus something else. And the reason why they got there was effectively the industry said, listen, these attacks don't operate in silos. They're hybrid by nature. They may not always compromise an endpoint. There may not always be EDR on the endpoint. So we want to be able to correlate as much of the attack as possible and see the entire kill chain of the attacker. And that's sort of where EDR kind of evolved into XDR. A lot of times we see SIEM thrown in the mix as sort of like that other data point. But SIEM in itself also has its challenges. But ultimately, the goal of XDR is to really identify and correlate the attacks, identify lateral movement as they pivot throughout applications, endpoints, network, cloud, identity, and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you. And so next we're going to talk about, what you should look for in an XDR for those, interested.
Sure thing. So if we go off of the definition that, XDR may be something like EDR plus SIEM or something else, right? Or even SIEM plus something else. A lot of times, coverage is something that is the number one thing that they're after, which is trying to ensure that you have a holistic view of the attack surface. Coverage is something that I think a lot of the XDR vendors claim to do really well. Ultimately, the goal here is about reducing blind spots. And again, being able to capture things like lateral movement. The challenge with something like an EDR, though, on its own would be, hey, we simply can't deploy agents in every place. So we may have some blind spots just on our endpoints where we have things like personal devices, third-party contractors, identities, supply chain, you name it, physical appliances, right? There's just places where you simply can't put an EDR. So then the thought becomes, well, can we add to this with something like a SIEM? The reality is, SIEM has sort of proven to be relatively ineffective for things like threat hunting. If you think about it, they can be very complex. They can take a lot of resources to manage and maintain. Oftentimes, the onus is completely on the analyst to draw their own correlations out of a SIEM. Sometimes I sort of joke and think about it as like a junk drawer where you just throw all of your logs and events in and hope to find that one thing you're looking for. The reality is it's very challenging. And this is where something like, effective machine learning and AI really comes in and sort of solving that problem, which kind of brings the next point in some things that our customers look for in an XDR, which is the clarity, right? And this is something that I would say at Vectra we do better than anybody else. Providing a clear signal in real time is ultimately what attackers are trying to evade, and ultimately what defenders are using to find those attackers, right? So it gives the advantage to the defenders if they can provide a signal that identifies the attacker in real time across that entire attack surface that we saw with coverage. This is where things like machine learning come in, artificial intelligence, really looking for the right actual attacker behavior, maybe mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, as opposed to things like just signatures or indicators of compromise. So having a clear signal ultimately allows a SOC to respond faster and to stop these threats in real time. The last piece, and this is something that really is emphasized on the R in XDR, is the response, and that's control. Being able to stop the threat rather than just slow it down is really dependent on those other two factors. Making sure you don't have blind spots, making sure you have the right coverage, making sure that the signal you're getting is of very high efficacy with very low noise. Then you can take a targeted response where you can invoke things like integrations, where you can maybe use your EDR capabilities on the endpoint, maybe do things like resetting accounts or expiring MFA tokens. The response playbook is really going to vary depending on the sophistication of the attacker or the adversary. But ultimately, having good integrations here is going to be really important because you can't really rely on one single tool of all of the tools that you may own to stop that threat. It may be a multi-pronged approach.
Yep, definitely. Thank you. You bring up really great points. I mean, I think overall, SOC teams and enterprises really just want to stop hybrid attacks, especially as you mentioned, lateral movement, and even with EDR and the SIEM, like if you take EDR, as you mentioned, they can't physically be placed everywhere. And so, especially when, a lot of orgs are moving to the cloud, there can be gaps there, which creates gaps in clarity and control, as you mentioned as well. And even in the SIEM, it's oftentimes the SIEM is only as good as the data it gets, right? So if you're getting bad data up front, then you're probably not going to be able to do, the threat hunting and have all that knowledge and information to act accordingly. And that's where control comes in as well. So I think, in summary, I think you need an XDR, right, to help stop hybrid cloud attacks, because as you mentioned, it's typically not just one security tool in your toolbox that can, end all be all for everything. So great points that you made. Thank you.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a big proponent of defense in depth. I mean, you absolutely should have an EDR, in my opinion. There's
Yeah.
great use cases for a SIEM, but the reality is, ultimately what's tying all of this together and the end goal of being able to identify and respond as quickly as possible or in real time, generally relies on a little bit more than just what you're getting from a traditional integration with something like a SIEM and an EDR. There's usually a lot more that goes on to that if you're going to be going against these sophisticated adversaries. Really advanced evasive attackers. Like you said, Nicole, lateral movement. So not just across the network, but from the network to identity, the network to cloud, cloud to ground. These are areas where attackers are operating. And it's really important to have all three things really well in order to be able to respond as quickly as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you. Perfect. Well, that wraps up our time here today. I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you're interested in more of our podcasts, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you again, JR, for all of your insights and your time today.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye. Hey.